Alright, so in this project we're going to create kind of a silly game. Basically we have this first screen that says catch the insect, which is the name of the game. We click play, it shows us this screen where we can select a specific insect, what's your favorite insect. We'll say fly, and immediately a fly gets put on the screen and the timer starts going. We have a score up here. If I click, it's going to go ahead and generate 2 more. I click that one, it's going to generate 2, this is going to generate 2, and they're basically just going to keep coming, and the faster I click, the faster they're going to come. And if you see the score, when it gets to 20, so I'm just going to keep clicking these, and when it gets to 20 we get a message that says, are you annoyed yet? You are playing an impossible game, because they're just going to keep coming as we click. It's never going to end. There's no end to the game, so it's impossible to win. So it's kind of a silly thing, but I think there's a lot that we can learn in terms of, you know, setting a timer and inserting random objects into the DOM. They have a random rotation. You can see they're all facing random ways. So I think that it's a nice little project. There's quite a bit of JavaScript relative to a lot of the projects in this course. So I think that you'll enjoy it. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to get started now. This particular project has 3 different screens that will be switched between. We have the start screen. When we click play game, we choose our insect, and then we have the game screen. So we have to break that up, and we might have to switch back and forth from CSS to JavaScript to kind of get certain things to show, so we can, you know, add the logic and also style it. So I'm going to add a title here of catch the insect, and each screen is going to have a class of screen around it. The first one will just have an h1. We'll say catch the insect, so the title, and then we'll have a button and a class of btn for styling and an ID of start-btn, and just say play game. All right, and then the next screen, so class of screen, and this is going to be the insect selection screen. So we'll have an h1 and we'll say what is your, in quotes we'll say favorite, because obviously nobody has a favorite insect. And then the choices are going to be in a UL with the class of insects-list, and a list item, and inside the list item will be a button. I'm going to give this button a class of choose-insect-btn, and inside the button a paragraph with the name of the insect, so fly for the first one, image. Image is going to be a link from PNG image or pngimg.com, and just pass in fly there. All right, so that's what the choices are going to be: a list item with a button with an image inside. So I'm going to grab the other 3 and paste them in, because it's just the same thing, just different content. So if I save that, some of these images are really big, which we're going to fix when we get to the CSS, so we can't really see anything else. But the only thing we have to add now is the last screen, which is the game screen. So this will have a class of screen and also game-container. And we'll have an h3 with an ID of time. We'll say time:00:00. Let's have an h3 here with an ID of score, and say score : set that to 0 to begin with, and then an h5 with an ID of message. This is going to be our silly message. We're just going to say, are you annoyed yet? And then we'll have a line break, and after that line break we'll say you are playing an impossible game. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and jump into our style sheet, and we don't want to use display flex here, so I'm going to get rid of these lines here. We don't need those. Okay, and then I'll save and we can see the text. Now the font we're going to use, let's go up here and get rid of this. So font family is going to be press plus start plus 2p. And we want to do CSS, not CSS2. And then for the font family in the body, It's going to be press start to P, which gives us this really cool, like old school Nintendo game look. And then let's see, for the body, I think we should be good here. Let's text align center. So text align center for the body. All right, now each screen is going to take up the whole viewport. So we'll do that first. Let's set the screen class, and we want to display flex. As soon as I do that, it creates a row, which I don't want. I want them to be on top of each other. So flex direction will be column. That puts them back on top. Let's align item center, and let's justify content center. And then I'm going to set the height to be the full height, so 100 VH, and then the width will be full width, so 100 VW. And if I do that, then it sets each one to take up the whole screen. Now these images are just kind of messing everything up because they're so big. So let's handle that before we do anything else. I'm going to set the let's take the choose dash insects or insect dash btn image, and I'm going to set the width to 100 pixels and height 100 pixels, and object fit will be contain. So that will just get, shrink the images down, and now we're only seeing the first screen. All right, so let's go ahead and style this. Now I do want a background color on the body. So background color, and let's set 516 DFF, and then the color will be white. Okay, and then for the button, this has a class of BTN, so let's style that. Guess we'll put that up here. So border 0, let's set the background color to white, and let's set the color to that same blue, so 516, that color there. Wait, that's not right. 516, what is it? 516 DFF for the color. All right, and then the padding, let's do 15 pixels top and bottom, 20 left and right. And the font family, we want to inherit that. We want that to be the press start font, so we'll set that to inherit. And let's add a cursor pointer, and I think we should be good. Okay, so we got our little play. Let's actually get rid of that outline, so focus, set outline to 0, and then I'm also going to set a hover, so BTN hover state, let's just say opacity, and set that to 0.9. Okay, so that's our play, and I think that's all we have for the first screen. So what I'm going to do to change screens is actually go into the JavaScript. I know we're kind of skipping around here a little bit, but let's grab the screen. So I'll say const screens and say document dot query selector all, because there's more than one. So grab all the screen classes, and I want to just change the screen by taking screens, and the first one is going to be the 0 index, and I'm going to add a class. Let's say class list dot add, and we're going to add a class of up. Now in our style sheet where we have our screen class, we'll go right under it and say screen, and if it has class of up, what we want to do is call or we'll just do margin top and pull it up, so negative 100 viewport heights. If I save that, now we're seeing the next one. If I were to do 200, we'll see the last screen, okay, because they're just on top of each other, so I'm just margin top is going to move them up. So we're moving them up a whole viewport height, so the whole window. All right, so now we can continue on and we can style this page. Now I do just want to add, let's see, for the links. So for any links we have, I want to make sure the color is white. And then for any H1, I'm going to add a line height of 1.4. All right, now we can style this page. So this insect list, let's go down here above where we did the choose insect button image. That's part of this page. Let's do insects dash list, which is the UL. And we want them to be side by side. So we'll display flex. That'll turn it into a flex row. And I'm going to make sure they wrap. So flex wrap, we'll set to wrap. That'll set it, make them go on the next row. And then let's justify content center and take away any bullet points. So list style type should be none, and take away any padding. Padding should be 0. And then let's add some margin to the list items. So insects list li, we're going to add a margin of 10 pixels, kind of break them up a little bit. And now we want to style the button itself. So right above where we have the image, we'll do the button. We're going to make the background color transparent and give it a border of 2 pixels solid white. And let's make the color of the text white. And let's make a cursor pointer when we hover over it. And then the font family, it's a button, so we want to inherit the font, and the width and height are going to be 150 pixels. All right. And you can see that it wraps on small screens. All right. So we'll keep it like that for now. So on hover, let's go down here and let's say, actually we'll go right above it. So choose insect button, hover, if I can spell. So hover, let's do a background color of white, and let's make the color hexadecimal 516, this right here, DFF. So if I go hover over it, good. And then if it's active, so when we click, let's do a background color. So we'll say choose insect button when it's active. We'll do background color, and we're going to use RGBA here, and white, so 255 for red, green, blue, and then 0.7 for the alpha. Okay, so we get that that effect. All right, now for the rest of this, the game container and stuff, we're gonna do that in the next video, but let's change the page, and we'll do that now by just changing this screen up to, instead of -100, -200. So now we can see the final screen. All right, we'll continue styling that in the next video. So now we want to style the final screen here, the whole game container. So at the bottom of the CSS file, let's say game container, and we're going to position this to be relative so that we can position child elements absolute within it. Okay, now the time, let's grab the time and the score, which I usually don't like to style by ID. So I mean, it's fine, but I'm going to add a class of time, and it's just preference, a class of score and a class of message. So that way we can just style by the class instead of ID. And doing it by the ID is absolutely fine. It's just preference for me. So we're going to set that, let's say top. Well, we need to position both of these absolute, and then say from the top 20 pixels, which is going to put them in the same exact place. So let's say for the time, the left position will be 20 pixels, and for the score, the right, we'll do 20 pixels from the right, which will put them on each side here. Now for the message, initially it's going to be up here. We're not going to be able to see it, but it's going to have a class of visible when it comes into sight. So I'm going to just manually add the class of visible for now. All right, and then we'll add message, and let's make the line height 1.6, break that up a little bit. Actually, we'll do like 1.7, and let's set, I'm going to set a background on it. So background color is going to be RGBA, black, and then 0.5. So give it a little background. We're going to make the width of it 100%, and let's add 20 pixels of padding. And it should always be on top, so Z index is going to be 100. Now you don't have to add this message. It's just it's basically a joke, you know. But you don't have to have this message come in, because once it comes in, if any insects are behind it, you're not going to be able to click and keep playing. So it's up to you if you want to remove it or not. Let's see. I want to text align to the center, and opacity is going to be set to 0, which is going to make it go away. However, I'm going to go down here and say message, if it has the class of visible, then set opacity to 1. In addition to that, we want to position it. So let's position absolute, and we're going to set this from the top, set it to 0. It's going to move it up there. Let's say left 50%, which is going to put the beginning of it at 50% from the left. So let's do a translate, which will translate on X and Y. So we want a negative 50% on X, and whoops, I'm sorry, we need to transform. Translate's not a property. We want to transform and then translate. Negative 50 on X, and then we want it to go way up above where it can't be seen, so 150% Y. So now it's up here, but when it's visible, what we'll do is I'm going to copy that, and we're going to set it to positive 150 if that visible is added. All right, and then we do want it to transition in, so let's add a transition on this, and transition the transform property in 0.4 seconds with an ease in effect. All right, so that takes care of the message. Now we don't want to show this right now, so let's get rid of the visible class. Now the last thing to do is to style the actual, or the last thing with CSS is to style the insect, which we don't have any because they're going to be inserted with JavaScript. So I'm going to temporarily just put a class of insect and then an image, and just grab one of these. I'll grab the fly image here, and let's put that in here and save. So now we get the fly. So the class of insect, we're gonna actually display as flex, so we can add align item center and justify content center, and the width will be 100 pixels and the height will be 100 pixels, but the image is currently breaking out of that. So let's say for the insect image, we want this same thing. Whoops, that's what I get for trying to be too smart with shortcuts. Let's just do it the dumb way. All right, so we'll contain that within insect, so we have 100 pixels height and width. Now we want to position this to be absolute, and what's going to place it in a random spot is the top and left values. So I'm just going to hard code, we'll say 100 let's do 200 pixels from the top, and then we'll do 300 pixels from the left. and we're going to want to add transform, and we want to translate on the X and Y axis negative 50% and negative 50%. But we also want a scale, because the way that it's going to go away is by setting scale to 0. So by default, this will be set to 1. Right? So now you can see it's in this spot here. Now if I move, let's move top down to like 600, and then it gets put down there. If I do 400, it gets put there. If I want to move it over horizontally, I could say 500, moves it over there. Okay, so this is going to be random within the JavaScript. In fact, I'm going to move these to the end because we're going to get rid of these because, again, they're going to be random. So what else? Let's add a cursor pointer to this because we're going to be clicking on these. And we also want to add a transition on the transform property, so it kind of fades out. So transition on transform, let's say 0.3 seconds, and do an ease out. Now when it's caught, when the insect is caught or clicked on, it's going to scale down to 0. So what I'll do is take this and say if the insect has a class of caught, then we're going to scale it down to 0. All right, so if I were to add on to this, and this will be all done in JavaScript, but if I add caught, it's going to go away. Okay, so I think that's all the styling that we need to do. Yeah, so we'll just go ahead and get rid of this div of insect now that we know that we can place that in the DOM, and it will, we can place it in a random spot. So I'm also going to get rid of top and left because those are going to be random. Okay, so our styling should be all set. Now I'm gonna let's see, I'm going to, where did I put the up? Did I add the class of up? No, I did that here in the JavaScript. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this. I just want to start on the front page. Okay, we'll do that. And up, the class of up should only be negative 100. Where is it? Screen up, right here. So that should be 100. All right, so now that that's all set, we're ready to start on the JavaScript and actually give functionality to this game. All right, so now we're going to start on the JavaScript, and we're going to have quite a few functions here to do different things. So I'll try to do this in the order that makes the most sense. First, we need to bring in everything we need. So we have our screens already brought in. And in addition to screens, we're going to want the buttons, the choose insect buttons. So let's say class of choose dash insect dash btn, and there's multiple of those, so we're using query selector all, and we'll say choose underscore insect underscore btns because there's more than one. All right, then we want to get the start button, so let's say const start underscore btn and set that to document dot, and that's a ID, I believe, right? So we have our, let's see, our start button is an ID. So document dot get element by ID, and that is start dash btn. All right, so I'm going to copy that down. The next thing we want is the game container. We want to do game underscore container. And game container is a class, so we could add an ID, but we'll just use query selector here and select the class of game container. All right, and then let's see, I'm going to copy this start button down again because we want to get an element by ID. We want to get the time, and I'm going to call this time L for time element. We also want the score element, so score L, that has the ID of score, and then we also have the message, which has an ID of message. Actually, I think it makes sense to use an ID of game container. So let's change this to get element by ID and just get rid of the dot. And then in our HTML, let's see right here. Yeah, it makes more sense to do this anyway. So, but we did style it with game container, so we'll leave that. But let's add an ID of game container. All right, so we have, I think we have everything we need. Message, yeah. I'm just going to move the game container up here above time element. All right, now as far as some global variables, we want seconds, which is going to be 0 by default. We want the score, which is going to be 0, obviously. And then the selected insect, which is going to be an object with the image source and the image alt, but we'll just set it to an empty object for now. Now when we click the start button, let's say start button, we're going to add an event listener and listen for a click, and when that happens, we're going to go ahead and switch the screen. So we'll say screens, which is a node list of all the class, the screen classes. We want the first one, so the 0 index, and then we want to add a class list, or add a class, so class list add of up. And the up class will just set the margin top to -100 viewport heights, which should switch it. Now I do want it to have a transition, so in screen, let's add a transition on the margin property, 0.5 seconds, and we'll do ease, transition, and let's do ease out. All right, so if I save my JavaScript and I click, now it does a transition and it adds that margin top, and now we see our second screen. Now if you reload, it's going to stay on the screen, so if you for some reason have to go back to the first screen, just go ahead and stop the live server and restart it. Now for the buttons here, we brought those in, right? Let's see, yeah, so we have this choose insect BTNS. So on that, let's go ahead and loop through with a for each and say for each BTN, we want to add an event listener, so BTN add event listener and listen for a click. And when that happens, we'll run a function. And I want to get, we'll say image, and from that particular button, we can use query selector. So query selector, from that button, we want the image that's inside of it. And then we want the source, which is the link to the image. So we can get that by taking that image and getting an attribute. So we want to get the source attribute, and then we also want the alt attribute. And we'll say const alt for that. All right, and now this selected insect here, we're going to go ahead and set that to an object with the source and the alt of that insect. Okay, and then we want to change screens. So screens, this time we're going to select the second screen, which has an index of 1, class list, and we want to then add the class of up. Now before we do that, or before we go and try that, we're also going to call a function called create insect, because as soon as we click this, we want it to then generate or create an insect and put it in a random spot. So I'm going to set a timeout here and set it for 1 second to call create insect. So create insect in 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. And then we also need to start the timer and stuff. So we'll have a start game function as well. So it's going to wait a second. It's going to start the game right away. It's going to wait a second and call create insect. So we need those two functions. So let's say function, we'll say create insect. So this is what's going to insert it into the DOM. So let's say const insect, and let's document.create element. Okay, so we're going to create a div. Remember, we manually inserted this in the last video. So that div we want to add a class to. So we'll take insect and let's say class list.add, add the class of insect. Now we need to get a random location to place it. And remember, in, where is it? The insect class, remember we have position absolute, and I showed you top and left in the last video to put it wherever we want. That top and left is going to be random. So what we'll do is say const, and we're going to use destructuring to get the value of x and y from a function that we create called getRandomLocation. All right, so let's create function getRandomLocation. And the way this is going to work is we need to figure out the width and the height of the window, because we want to make sure it gets put in the window, not somewhere, you know, out to the side. So let's say const width, set that to the window dot inner width, which will give us the pixels of, you know, however wide it is. Same thing with the height. So height is going to be window dot inner height. All right, and then to get the x value, we'll say const x and set that to math.random. That'll give us a random decimal. We want to then multiply that by, let's say, whatever the window width is, minus 200 plus 100. Because we want it to be, you know, we don't want it to be way over to the edge or like half off the edge. We want it to be somewhere in here. So then for y, we're going to do the same thing except with the height. So this will be y. And then what we're going to return from this is an object with x and y. And then we're pulling those values out of the function here to get that random spot. Then we'll take the insect that we're building up here and set the style and set the top value to whatever y is. So in here we'll say y pixels. All right, and then we'll do the same for x. That's going to be the left value. Remember, we hard coded those in the last video, but now they're going to be random. Now this isn't going to, it's not going to insert it into the DOM just yet. We need to set our inner HTML, like what do we want inside of it, which is going to be an image. So an image tag. And in here we want to have the source, and the source is going to be the selected insect, which is an object with a source and an alt. So we want the source value. And then the alt will be the selected insect alt value. Now I also want it to have an a random rotation. I don't want it to always look like this. Sometimes it might face this way or that way or down. So we'll add an inline style, right? And in this style, let's add transform. And with transform, you can rotate an element, and we want it to be a random rotation. So in here, let's say math.random, and random should have parentheses, and then we want to multiply that by 360 and degrees, because rotate takes in a number and then DEG. So it'll just give us a random number between, you know, under 360. All right, so that will add the HTML. Now we're going to want to add it to the DOM. So take the game container and append child, because we're putting it into the game container. Now we also want to add an event listener, because we want to be able to click on the insect. So let's take the insect and add an event listener. So when we click on an insect, we're then going to call a function called catch insect. All right, so let's go down here and create function catch insect. And for now, I'm going to just console log 1, 2, 3, just to see if this works up to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the fly. And there we go. So it comes down and then the fly gets put here. If I click it, if I open my console, I see 1, 2, 3. I also see start game is not defined. So start game is what's going to do the timer and stuff. So I'm actually going to just restart this server real quick. And then for start game, let's put that up at the top here, because we did the create insect, and start game has to also start, or has to run. And that's going to be basically start game. We're going to set an interval, which means we're going to set something to keep happening. And we want to run a function called increase time. And we want that to happen every second, so every 1,000 milliseconds. So let's say function increase time. And we want our minutes. So let's say let m equals, we're going to round down, so math.floor, and we want to take our seconds and divide by 60. That'll give us our minutes. And then for our seconds, we're just going to set that to whatever the seconds is, modulus 60, so the remainder of from 60. Now, if the minutes or seconds are less than 10, like if it's 6, we want it to say 0.6 for minute and second. So let's say minute equals, and then a conditional. If minute is less than 10, then, so just using a ternary here, then we're going to add a 0 onto minute, else it'll just be minute. And then we'll do the same for second. This will be second. And say if this will be second, second. Okay, so yeah. And then after we do that, we need to take our time element from the DOM and set the inner HTML, and we're going to set it to say time colon minute colon and then second. All right, then of course we need to increase seconds or increment seconds by 1. All right, so that's that. So let's just try that. I'm going to save and then play game, choose a spider. Spider gets put, and you can see the time is now running. Okay, now if I click, nothing's happening. It'll just console log because that's all I've done down here for catch insect. So when we click an insect, what we're going to want to happen is to increase the score. So let's call a function called increase score, and we'll go ahead and add that down here, increase score. So we just want to increment the score by 1, so score plus plus, and then we want to take the score element and set the inner HTML to score colon and then whatever the score is. Now if you want to insert the annoying message, we can put a conditional here and say if the score is greater than 19, meaning if you hit 20, then we'll take the message and add the class of visible. So class list dot add, and add the class of visible, which will make it come down. All right, now that'll increase the score, and after we do that, we want to then add a class to the insect. So this keyword we can use, which pertains to the insect that's clicked on. So we can add a class to that of caught, because remember what the caught class does is it scales it down to 0. So it starts at scale 1, which is normal. Scale 0 will make it disappear, but it's not going to remove it from the DOM. So that's what we want to do after that. And we're just going to set a timeout because we don't want to try to remove it, too quickly. So we'll set a timeout. It'll disappear right away because of this class. It scales down, but then after 2 seconds we'll remove it. So let's say this dot remove. Actually, let's do this dot remove and then do that 2 seconds later. Okay, then we want to start to add more insects. So we'll have a function called add insects, and this will be really simple because all we're doing is calling create insect after a certain amount of time. So we'll set a timeout and then we'll call create insect after a second, and let's create another one after 1.5 seconds. So it's going to be impossible because every time you click one, two more show up, right? And it's just going to keep going. So, and there's no end to the game. So let's save and let's try it out. So I'm going to go ahead and play. We'll choose a fly, and we get a random insect in a random rotation. Timer's going. I click it. We get another. We get two more. Click that one. Two more are going to come after that one. Two more after that one. And the faster I go, you know, the more they're going to come. And when my score gets to 20, so 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, it says, are you annoyed yet? You're playing an impossible game. And you can keep playing too. The score will keep going up. The timer will keep going, but it's obviously impossible to win. They're just going to keep coming. All right, so it's kind of a stupid thing. It's kind of a stupid game, but it just, you know, gives you an idea of how to do something like this. And you could make it an actual game. Maybe you have to get a certain amount after a certain amount of time, but it shows you how to set up a timer and a score and add things to the DOM in random positions. And you can get rid of this message if you want by just commenting this out right here. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this little project, this silly game, and I'll see you in the next project.